What happened when an undercover CEO discovered the shocking truth about his own company? Hello, amazing viewers. Welcome back to our channel where we bring you powerful stories of transformation, justice, and leadership. Today, we're diving into the incredible journey of Oliver Hayes, a successful CEO who went undercover as a gardener at his own prestigious landscaping company, Hayes Landscaping and Design. What he found was worse than he ever imagined: exploitation, neglect, and a culture of indifference toward his hard-working employees. But instead of walking away, Oliver took bold, compassionate action to rebuild his company from the ground up. Stay tuned because this story will leave you inspired. Oliver Hayes stared out of his sleek office's glass walls, his gaze drifting past the meticulously manicured rooftop garden and toward the bustling cityscape beyond. As the CEO of Hayes Landscaping and Design, he had built an empire celebrated for its elegant, high-end garden designs and impeccable service. His company catered to the wealthiest clients, transforming estates into lush, picturesque landscapes worthy of magazine covers. But recently, Oliver had been troubled by reports filtering up through his executive team, grumblings about low morale, inconsistent pay, poor working conditions, and complaints of employees feeling neglected. It wasn't the first time he had heard such complaints, but it was the first time he couldn't dismiss them. The reports didn't come from discontented customers. They came from his own workers. And worse, they were becoming more frequent. Oliver had always prided himself on creating a company that valued creativity, skill, and hard work. He believed his employees were well treated, rewarded fairly, and given opportunities to thrive. But if that were true, why were more and more employees leaving? Why were trusted managers reporting frustration and exhaustion? Disturbed by the gap between his vision and the reality hinted at by those reports, Oliver decided he needed to see the truth for himself. Conversations with his board members yielded nothing but assurances that the numbers looked good and profitability was high. But Oliver's instincts told him something was wrong, something the spreadsheets couldn't capture. So he devised a plan to go undercover as a trainee gardener. He would strip away his title, his influence, and his comfort to work side by side with his employees. Only then would he truly understand their struggles and find out if his company had betrayed the values he once held dear. The idea felt reckless, perhaps even foolish, but Oliver's growing unease left him with little choice. Determined and ready to face whatever truth awaited him, he prepared his new identity: Ben Carter, a man eager to learn the trade. Little did he know, his journey would reveal more than just operational flaws. It would force him to confront his own failures as a leader. Oliver Hayes arrived at the sprawling Carmichael estate before sunrise, his hands already gritty from hauling equipment out of the company truck. Dressed in second-hand work boots and faded jeans, he looked nothing like the polished executive who had spent years building Hayes Landscaping and Design into a high-end brand. As he approached the worksite under the alias Ben Carter, he was greeted by the sharp scent of freshly cut grass and the earthy richness of soil. But beneath the pristine elegance of the estate's sculpted hedges and expansive lawns, Oliver quickly noticed the signs of strain. The crew's break area was nothing more than a shaded corner behind the tool shed, cluttered, cramped, and littered with discarded coffee cups and broken tools. The amenities were practically non-existent: a rusty water cooler, a couple of rickety folding chairs, and a patched-up first aid kit that looked older than most of the workers. As Oliver unloaded tools, he observed the hurried efficiency of the team, men and women laboring under the hot sun with sweat already darkening their shirts. Paul Dawson, the site foreman, introduced himself with a distracted nod and a gruff, "You here to work or stand around, Carter?" Paul's brusque demeanor was nothing Oliver hadn't expected. As the man in charge of keeping wealthy clients satisfied, Paul's stress levels were visibly high. Still, Oliver couldn't help but notice the exhaustion etched into the foreman's features, the way his shoulders slumped when he thought no one was watching. Paul rattled off Oliver's tasks with military precision, handing him a shovel and pointing toward an overgrown garden bed that needed clearing. "No time for hand-holding. You fall behind, you catch up on your own time," Paul said before stalking off to oversee another task. Oliver dug into his work, keeping his head down, but his eyes open. He noticed the worn-out tools, the inadequate safety gear, and the quiet frustration simmering beneath the workers' exchanges. Despite the beauty of the estate they toiled to maintain, it was clear the crew's own working conditions were anything but luxurious. As Oliver labored under the blistering sun, he began to understand that the perfection his company sold came at a far greater cost than he had ever realized. Oliver soon discovered that the Carmichael estate crew was a close-knit group, bound by shared struggles more than camaraderie. They worked together with practiced efficiency, often communicating through nods and gestures more than words. Over the first few days, Oliver labored alongside them, his muscles aching from the unrelenting physical work. The crew's respect had to be earned, and Oliver quickly realized they weren't impressed by titles or empty promises, only hard work and reliability. His guide through the new reality was Sam Carter, a veteran gardener with weathered hands and a steady, unflinching demeanor. Sam had been with Hayes Landscaping and Design for over 14 years. His knowledge of plants and landscaping techniques as sharp as the pruning shears he carried at his belt. Sam's reputation among the workers was solid, but there was an unspoken sadness about him, a quiet resignation that Oliver couldn't ignore. Sam rarely spoke of his personal life, but during lunch breaks, Oliver learned bits and pieces from the others. Sam had lost his wife to cancer 3 years prior, and the medical bills had devoured his savings. Rather than burden his only son, Sam chose to live in a makeshift shelter on the estate grounds, sleeping in a dilapidated shed near the far edge of the property. The knowledge gnawed at Oliver, making him question how he had been so oblivious to such struggles within his own company. Oliver also got to know others on the crew. Claire, a single mother of 2, often picked up double shifts just to keep up with her children's school expenses. She wore exhaustion like a second skin, her eyes constantly darting to her phone, waiting for updates from home. Luis, a college-age worker with dreams of opening his own landscaping business, struggled to save money while battling inadequate pay and unreliable hours. They all had their reasons for enduring the grueling work, and none of them involved passion for the industry or loyalty to Hayes Landscaping and Design. The more Oliver listened, the clearer it became that his workers' dedication wasn't born of loyalty to the company, but rather a relentless battle for survival. Each conversation revealed another layer of hardship and sacrifice, forcing Oliver to confront the growing realization that his leadership had failed the very people who made his success possible. As Oliver settled into the grueling daily routine, his understanding of the problems plaguing Hayes Landscaping and Design deepened. Conversations with the crew during lunch breaks and late afternoons painted a grim picture of neglect and exploitation. Sam Carter, the veteran gardener, became Oliver's closest confidant, though the man rarely spoke about himself. It was from others that Oliver pieced together the painful truth. Sam had been living in a rundown shed on the Carmichael estate for nearly 2 years. After his wife's death from cancer, the crushing weight of medical bills left him with nothing but his pride and his skill. Rather than ask his son for help, Sam had chosen to make do with what little he had, sleeping on a tattered mattress surrounded by rusted tools and broken equipment. The company's negligence extended far beyond Sam's situation. Claire, the single mother, revealed that she had been fighting for months to receive the overtime pay she was rightfully owed. Despite repeated complaints to the HR department, her paychecks continued to come up short. She had been dismissed with excuses about clerical errors and promises of corrections that never materialized. Luis, the ambitious young worker, confided that he had been asked to work without proper safety gear on multiple occasions. His complaints were met with scorn from higher-ups who insisted he should be grateful just to have a job. The lack of safety precautions was a common theme among the workers. Several had sustained minor injuries from using faulty tools or outdated equipment. The tipping point for Oliver came during a conversation with Paul Dawson, the overworked foreman. Paul admitted with a weary resignation that his requests for new equipment and more reasonable schedules had been repeatedly ignored by management. "They only care about the clients," Paul confessed bitterly. "As long as the gardens look perfect, it doesn't matter how many backs we break getting them there." Oliver felt a growing sense of shame as he realized how disconnected he had become from the very people who made his company successful. From faulty tools and inadequate safety measures to unpaid overtime and crushing financial struggles, the problems ran far deeper than Oliver had anticipated. His workers weren't just enduring difficult conditions, they were actively being exploited. The luxury that Hayes Landscaping and Design promised its clients came at the expense of the people who maintained it, and Oliver could no longer ignore the truth he had uncovered. The more Oliver immersed himself in the daily grind of Hayes landscaping and design, the more he witnessed the neglect and strain inflicted upon his workers. Long days spent clearing brush, planting shrubs, and sculpting hedges revealed just how physically demanding the work truly was. Yet despite the grueling labor, Oliver noticed his crew was often forced to make do with broken or outdated tools. The hedge trimmers frequently jammed, the lawnmowers sputtered and died mid-operation, and the shovels and rakes were so worn their handles splintered with each use. Oliver's hands blistered from the unforgiving tools, but the others seemed resigned to their condition. One morning, Oliver watched as Claire struggled to wrangle a malfunctioning leaf blower. The equipment coughed and spat, its motor cutting out repeatedly. Sweat beaded her forehead as she wrestled with the unwieldy machine, her frustration evident. "This thing's been broken for months," she muttered, her voice thick with fatigue. "But whenever we ask for replacements, they tell us the budget won't allow it." Her complaint was far from isolated. Luis mentioned that he had been required to use a rusty pair of pruning shears for weeks, his hands cramping from the exertion. Sam's situation was even worse. His tools were older than some of the plants he worked on, and when they broke, he would simply repair them with duct tape or scrap metal found on the job. The strain wasn't limited to faulty equipment. The schedules were relentless, with barely any time allotted for breaks. Paul Dawson, the foreman, admitted that the unrealistic deadlines set by management left him with little choice but to push the crew harder than was reasonable. "They want perfection," Paul said bitterly, "but they don't care what it takes to achieve it." Oliver also saw how Sam's makeshift living arrangement was taking its toll. During one particularly cold night, Oliver caught a glimpse of Sam huddled in the cramped shed, trying to warm his hands over a tiny portable heater. The sight stirred a deep guilt within Oliver. Sam's dedication to his work had been met with nothing but exploitation. Despite his years of service, he had been left to fend for himself, abandoned by a company that prided itself on quality and care. As the days wore on, Oliver couldn't help but feel the weight of his own negligence bearing down on him. This was not the company he had intended to build, and he could no longer hide from that harsh reality. Oliver Hayes returned to the company's headquarters with a sense of urgency burning through his veins. He had spent weeks working alongside his gardeners, witnessing firsthand the crushing neglect, exploitation, and disregard for their well-being. It wasn't just mismanagement, it was betrayal. His company had become everything he had once vowed to avoid, a machine driven by profit and prestige at the expense of its workers. Fueled by frustration and guilt, Oliver stormed into the offices of his senior management team unannounced. His sudden appearance startled the executives, who were accustomed to scheduled meetings and polished presentations, not impromptu confrontations. "Why haven't I heard about these issues from you?" Oliver's voice was sharp, his gaze hard as he addressed the room of well-dressed managers. Unpaid overtime, faulty equipment, unsafe working conditions, workers are forced to live in sheds and sleep in trucks just to make ends meet. How has this been allowed to happen? The silence that followed his words was thick and uncomfortable. Eyes darted away from his furious glare, and throats cleared nervously. Eventually, David Norris, the head of HR, spoke up, his tone defensive and strained. "We've been trying to address those concerns, Mr. Hayes, but you have to understand, budgets are tight and replacing equipment isn't cheap. As for unpaid overtime, it's mostly clerical errors. We're working on fixing them." "Working on it," Oliver's voice rose, his frustration boiling over. "You've been working on it for years, but nothing changes. And now people like Sam Carter are sleeping in sheds and suffering from untreated injuries because you can't be bothered to prioritize their well-being." David shifted uncomfortably, his face paling. "We can't accommodate everyone's needs, Oliver. If we keep bending over backward for every complaint, we'll go under." Oliver's fists clenched at his sides. This company was built on the idea of respect and opportunity for everyone. If you've forgotten that, then maybe you don't belong here. He locked eyes with each member of his management team, his voice steady and cold. "Effective immediately, I'm implementing comprehensive reforms. Pay discrepancies will be corrected. Equipment will be repaired or replaced. Working conditions will be improved, and no employee will be forced to live without basic human dignity. If anyone here has a problem with that, consider this your invitation to leave." The stunned silence that followed was deafening. Oliver left the room with his resolve hardened. If his management team refused to do their jobs, he would do it himself. Change was coming, and Oliver would ensure it was real, lasting, and built on compassion rather than exploitation. The breaking point came on a blistering afternoon at the Carmichael estate, where Oliver had returned to continue working alongside his crew. The sun beat down mercilessly, its heat amplified by the freshly laid stone paths they were expected to clean and polish to perfection. Oliver's muscles ached from days of strenuous labor, but his discomfort paled in comparison to what he saw happening around him. Luis worked through the pain of a sprained wrist, his complaints about the faulty equipment ignored by management. Claire looked pale and exhausted, her hands trembling slightly as she trimmed hedges. Her pay still shorted despite repeated complaints. But it was Sam Carter's collapse that shattered Oliver's composure. Oliver found him hunched over in the garden, struggling to catch his breath after lifting a heavy planter, alone. His face was ashen, his breathing shallow, but he stubbornly waved off Oliver's concern. "I'm fine, just need a minute," Sam rasped, his voice thin and strained. When Oliver insisted he take a break, Sam shook his head, eyes dull with resignation. "Can't afford time off, can't afford anything, really." The words echoed in Oliver's mind, a bitter truth he could no longer ignore. That evening Oliver visited the shed where Sam had been living. The structure was little more than a glorified storage space, cluttered with rusted tools and broken equipment. Sam's makeshift bed was a thin, worn-out mattress covered by a ragged blanket. A single portable heater provided meager warmth, barely enough to keep the cold at bay. The conditions were beyond unacceptable. They were inhumane. Oliver's hands trembled as he left the shed, his chest tight with guilt and anger. How had he allowed his company to descend to this point? It was clear now that his previous attempts to confront management were only the beginning. The company's indifference was embedded deeply in its culture, and Oliver would have to rip it out by the roots. Sam's suffering was the final straw, and Oliver's determination hardened. Change was no longer an option, it was a necessity, and he would stop at nothing to make it happen. Oliver Hayes returned to Hayes Landscaping and Design headquarters with a fire burning in his chest. What he had witnessed at the Carmichael estate was beyond neglect. It was outright cruelty. Sam Carter's suffering, Claire's ongoing battles with payroll, Luis's struggle with faulty tools, and Paul's desperation to meet impossible demands had all built up to this moment. Oliver couldn't ignore the fact that his leadership had enabled this toxic culture to take root. The realization stung, but it also steeled his resolve. He would no longer allow his company to run on exploitation and indifference. Immediate action was the only way forward. Oliver called for an emergency meeting, gathering his senior management team and HR department into the boardroom. His entrance was abrupt and without ceremony. As he scanned the room, he noticed the nervous glances exchanged between executives and managers, their expressions a mix of confusion and irritation. David Norris, the head of HR, cleared his throat. "Sir, this is rather unorthodox. What's so urgent?" "What's urgent," Oliver began, his voice firm and icy, "is the fact that we have workers living in sheds, working through injuries, and being paid improperly, and none of you seem to care." His words struck like a hammer, the room falling into a stunned silence. "Sam Carter, one of our most dedicated employees, has been living in a dilapidated shed on the Carmichael estate for nearly 2 years. Claire has repeatedly reported payroll discrepancies that have yet to be corrected. Luis continues to risk injury using defective tools, and Paul is being forced to push his crew beyond reasonable limits because of unrealistic deadlines and budget cuts." David Norris bristled, his voice defensive. "We're aware of these issues, Mr. Hayes. We've been trying to address them." "Trying isn't good enough," Oliver snapped. "These aren't minor inconveniences, they're fundamental failures of leadership, and they will be corrected. Effective immediately, we are launching a comprehensive reform plan." He outlined his demands swiftly. Accurate payroll reviews with immediate corrections for errors, investment in new tools and equipment, implementation of proper safety protocols, and additional staffing to alleviate overwork. Oliver's words left no room for negotiation. His tone was sharp, his intentions clear. "Anyone unwilling to prioritize the welfare of our workers can consider their resignation accepted as of today. I will not tolerate complacency. From now on, this company will operate with integrity, empathy, and fairness. Oliver's gaze swept across the room, daring anyone to challenge him. No one spoke. As the meeting adjourned, Oliver felt the weight of his own commitment settle over him. The battle had begun, but for the first time, he felt he was fighting on the right side. Oliver Hayes knew that words alone wouldn't be enough to rebuild the fractured trust within Hayes Landscaping and Design. He had made promises in that boardroom, but now he needed to prove his commitment through genuine, relentless action. The very next morning, Oliver returned to the Carmichael estate, not in his polished CEO attire, but in the same rugged work clothes he had worn as Ben Carter. This time, however, he made no effort to hide his identity. Instead, he gathered the entire crew and admitted the truth. "I came here as Ben to learn about what's really happening within my own company," Oliver confessed, his gaze steady but humble. "And what I discovered was unacceptable. I failed you, but that ends now." Oliver worked alongside his employees every day for the next several weeks, taking shifts at various estates to fully understand the scope of their struggles. He arranged for immediate repairs and replacements of broken tools, ensuring Luis and the rest of the crew had the proper equipment they needed to do their jobs safely and efficiently. He ordered payroll audits to ensure Claire's overtime was compensated correctly, and instituted a transparent pay structure moving forward. Safety protocols were enforced, with regular inspections and clear reporting channels for any hazards or faulty equipment. But most importantly, Oliver made sure Sam Carter received proper medical treatment for his injuries and provided him with dignified housing near the company's headquarters. Sam resisted at first, his pride and independence making him reluctant to accept help, but Oliver's persistence, kindness, and willingness to work alongside him eventually broke through Sam's walls. The gesture wasn't just about providing shelter, it was about recognizing Sam's value and humanity. Gradually, Oliver's sincerity began to mend the shattered bonds of trust. Employees who had once been skeptical of management's intentions now saw real, tangible changes happening before their eyes. And as Oliver continued to show up, day after day, his presence became a reassurance that the company's transformation was real. But Oliver knew the true test would be making these changes last, and he was determined to see it through. Oliver Hayes' reforms at Hayes Landscaping and Design were not just temporary fixes. They were the foundation for a complete transformation. Over the following months, he implemented a series of structural changes aimed at rebuilding the company from the ground up. Payroll discrepancies were swiftly addressed, with all missed wages reimbursed and a new system established to ensure timely and accurate payments moving forward. Oliver hired additional staff to reduce the overwhelming workloads that had plagued employees like Sam, Claire, and Louis. More importantly, he created new positions focused on employee welfare and oversight, ensuring that no complaint or safety concern went ignored. Investing heavily in equipment upgrades, Oliver replaced outdated, broken tools with modern, efficient alternatives. He established a maintenance schedule to prevent future neglect and implemented clear safety protocols to minimize the risk of injuries. Employees were given the proper training and tools to do their jobs without fear of malfunction or harm. For the first time, workers felt empowered to speak up about their needs, without fear of retribution. Oliver also made sure that those living in precarious situations like Sam were provided with safe, reliable housing as part of their employment benefits. Beyond material changes, Oliver fostered a culture of transparency and collaboration. He invited feedback from employees at every level, instituting monthly meetings where workers could voice their concerns, share ideas, and contribute to company decisions. This open-door policy transformed the workplace atmosphere, replacing resentment and frustration with genuine enthusiasm and pride. Claire received the pay she was owed, Louise was promoted to lead a project of his own, and Paul's managerial role was restructured to give him the support he needed to guide his team effectively. Oliver's efforts extended beyond the company's internal workings. He also began marketing campaigns that highlighted the hard-working gardeners behind the luxurious landscapes, giving them the recognition and respect they deserved. Hayes Landscaping and Design was no longer a company driven solely by profits and prestige. It was now a business built on integrity, empathy, and a renewed commitment to valuing its workers. And as the months passed, that transformation became evident to everyone involved. Standing in the middle of a newly completed estate garden, Oliver Hayes looked around at the workers, laughing and chatting as they packed up their tools for the day. The air was different now, lighter, filled with a sense of pride and genuine satisfaction. What had once been a company divided by frustration and neglect was now thriving under a new vision rooted in compassion, fairness, and respect. Sam Carter, now a site supervisor with proper housing and health benefits, offered Oliver a nod of appreciation as he passed by, his shoulders no longer burdened by exhaustion. Claire's smile was genuine, her worries about shorted paychecks finally a thing of the past. Luis, newly promoted and full of ambition, spoke eagerly about his plans to expand the company's reach. The transformation wasn't perfect, and Oliver knew there would always be challenges, but he had learned the most important lesson of all. True leadership required being present, listening, and valuing the people who made success possible. The polished estates and elegant gardens were no longer his company's only legacy. Now, it was the empowerment and well-being of his workers. Oliver's undercover journey had started as a desperate attempt to uncover the truth but ended with a renewed commitment to integrity and empathy. Hayes Landscaping and Design was no longer just his company, it was theirs. And Oliver intended to keep it that way. The story of Oliver Hayes teaches a powerful lesson about leadership. True success isn't measured by profits or prestige, but by how well a company values and supports its workers. By going undercover, Oliver realized his neglect had allowed exploitation and suffering to fester. His journey revealed that real leadership means listening, understanding, and actively addressing employees' struggles. Through empathy and direct action, Oliver rebuilt Hayes Landscaping and Design into a business rooted in integrity, fairness, and collaboration. The lesson? Respecting and valuing your employees isn't just good ethics, it's the foundation of true, lasting success.